bands really sound the same.
No. Well, let's be honest. Voivod and Opeth sound the exact same. It's like total. I get it. Voivod. You like Opeth. It's cool.
Like Meshuggah and Rush. I mean, it's more like a concept rather than an actual sound. You know what I mean? So
it's a mentality.
We'll do our best to
Yeah.
make the most. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Lockhorns, live from the Banger Bar here at Banger Films, where each week we tackle the heavy metal family tree that we created for our first film, Metal Headbangers Journey, over 10 years ago, and basically see what's wrong with it. What bands need to be added, what bands need to be removed, and what subgenres need to be changed altogether. Say a thank you to our American viewers for tuning in on Thanksgiving. We're Canadian. We got that over with last month, but thanks for joining us instead of football. This week we are tackling MATHCORE, which there's been a lot of chatter about, a lot of debate around whether it should be added to the chart at all. But before we get into it, I want to remind everyone to please subscribe to Banger TV while you're watching, when you watch the archive version, whatever, please join us. So, MATHCORE. I came with a calculator because I do not understand how this music works. Thank you for the tight frame, Daniel. But also to help me figure this out is the inimitable Sam Sutherland.
Yeah, I got old school paper, so I'm going to be doing sort of classic MATHCORE, showing my work to the audience.
That's right.
Really figuring things out myself, not with the aid of machines.
Sam is a well-established music journalist here in Toronto. He's written a book called Perfect Youth and has a great YouTube channel called This Exists. And thank goodness he's here because I'm going to need the help. But I also need your help as well. You guys are really important to the discussion. We want to hear your opinions on MATHCORE. We want to hear your opinions on what bands belong, what bands should be removed, and again, whether or not MATHCORE really deserves to be on the chart at all. Off screen, we have Lisa Ladiseur, our Banger TV producer, and when we hear this sound, that's our cue to shut up and get on with it. So, before we get into it, excited to be here?
I'm excited to be here. I've been, hanging out for, the first couple of Lockhorns, keeping my mouth shut, and frankly, it's been killing me because I have all kinds of opinions about everything all the time. And this is especially interesting because the first episode that we did with Liam from Cancer Bats was about metalcore.
Yep.
And that is certainly a controversial part of the tree that you guys made. I have opinions about that part of the tree. And then we saw, MATHCORE kind of emerge as a question mark when you guys were talking about that. Like, does this deserve its own little thing?
Sure.
And I was like, I want to come and yell about that. That would be fun.
It came, I believe, from a discussion of this band.
The Boys.
And we'll get into this. We've got Dillinger in the prog metal subgenre on the existing chart, but when we had the metalcore chat with Liam, we scribbled up a MATHCORE heading and decided that really that's where Dillinger belongs.
You guys were scribbling.
We were definitely
There was some scribbling afoot.
And because this is an entirely new subgenre, we've prepared some beautiful plain white magnets on the board so we can make some additions.
I think the other genre that you guys developed that episode was new wave of American metalcore or something some while back. So we'll do that. That's the next episode as we're inventing parts of the trees.
And we also created a subgenre that was just question marks.
Right, yeah.
We're like, we have no fucking idea where that band fits.
Yeah.
We'll deal with it later.
Yeah. This we'll figure out at some point.
Cool.
Yeah.
So to get into this, Sam, give me your thoughts on what MATHCORE really is.
Well, I think of MATHCORE very specifically as a, derivative of metalcore. And I think that's sort of where it came up in the conversation that you had with Liam. People should definitely watch that episode because it was a pretty exciting conversation. And I think what sort of separates mathcore in a lot of people's minds from metalcore has been this idea that, metalcore is maybe more straightforward. You're talking about songs that are in like a 4/4 time signature, and the like really obvious thing with metalcore is that 4/4 is a no 4. I wish I had like a rhyme or something for that. That would have been amazing.
Do you need my calculator?
Yeah, that would be great. 4/4 is 6/8.
There you go.
The most obvious thing is that the songs are all just like that's I know, it's amazing, right? I've been practicing that. I was like in the washroom, muted my mic, and was like, okay, this is how it's gonna go. And that's like the sort of most obvious, I think, sort of characteristic.
Yeah.
People sort of think of it. I think there are other genres that have that, like janky, weird time signature sensibility, but they might have melodic vocals. And I always think of mathcore as being like very specifically derived from metalcore, always sort of screaming shouting vocals, no singing, no good cop in the mathcore world.
Yeah.
And subject matter wise, I think that we're often talking about bands that like maybe emerged from hardcore. A lot of the influences they had were maybe singing about politics, and they were like, don't want that, I'm gonna sing about how sad my life is, like, or just like weird abstract ideas.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
it's not about Reagan. Like, I don't think that there are any Converge songs about Reaganomics.
The other thing we talked about before we went on air was, of course, this whole feeling of chaos in the music. And that's not only, of course, in the music itself, but also on stage. I mean, I remember the first time I saw Dillinger, and I thought that I was going to get a guitar like through my temple if I got too close to Ben Weinman. So talk about that. Talk about the live show.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I did an interview once with Ben from Dillinger, who's I think like the lone remaining original member of that band at this point, because everyone else has been murdered, essentially. So I interviewed them, I think maybe around Miss Machine. I can't remember the record, for Exclaim magazine. And he at that time was like in a cast because he had broken his leg at a music video shoot. Like that band is just constantly at like 11 physically. There's an amazing video of Greg, the singer of the band, playing at a Tower Records. Like it's a mall show, and it just starts, and within seconds he kind of just like looks around and head walks like right to the back of the crowd. Like no one is safe. I think that's the idea. Like I remember seeing Dillinger at Lee's Palace, like at the third tiers, like a venue in Toronto, and there's like 3 different levels, and being like, I'm not even comfortable here. Like
Insane.
I think someone might murder me.
Insane.
I think there's a lot of.
Oh, the bell. The
bell
hurts.
That's
sometimes.
The first time the bell has rung for me, and I just realized how insulting it is. The bell is rude.
Okay, what we got to do though, we got to check in with what people are saying. Enough about us in the studio.
Yeah, that's fair.
So we got Paolo Benedetti. Mathcore is just a combination of prog and hardcore.
I mean, I think that's fair. It's interesting to me that like Dillinger, who we pulled out for the metalcore discussion, is actually on your tree, but like in the progressive metal subgenre.
Yeah.
And that like a lot of these bands, like these are kids in my mind that came from hardcore bands. Like their influences are not necessarily classically metal influences. I think these are bands that like were growing up into Black Flag as opposed to growing up into Maiden.
I might make the argument to Paolo that, okay, fine. So it is hardcore and prog metal. Maybe that is actually a good description to some extent, is actually capturing what this is about. Because clearly there was a generation of musicians that came up that were influenced by both.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, what else we got here? Fabio Mainieri, pardon the pronunciation, I've had a hard time considering it a genre. Fair enough. To me, some bands are progressive metal and others are metalcore. Well, admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of a lot of bands that would be considered hardcore, but I do think there is merits to creating another subgenre here, because a lot of the bands that I've been listening to prepare for today really would not fit in prog metal at all. The noise, the chaos, the level of uncertainty in the music is sort of taken to a whole nother level.
I think of like prog metal as being like, let's say a band like Between the Buried and Me, which I've seen show up a few times in the chat. Fabio Manieri also mentioned them there. And I think the thing is, when I picture a Between the Buried and Me show, I think of 5 guys, an amazing light show, all just staring at their hands. And when I think of like a Converge show and Dillinger show, some of the other bands that I think we're going to talk about adding to the chart, I think of Danger to Myself. I also think of, I was realizing this right before, we haven't talked about this yet, but like, if you're drooling while you're playing guitar, because you're like so crazy, then you're a mathcore band. Like, I remember this band from Montreal called Discord of a Forgotten Sketch, and like all the guitar players would just be like, they're just drooling everywhere.
We need like the drool meter.
Yeah,
that'll be the
I think
gauge
it's like
as to whether you get included on the chart. We should check in with Taego Queiroz from Portugal. This subgenre isn't really significant. The aim to define genre should simplify and not complicate.
I like the follow-up there from Tyler Monroe. What's the square root of a genre that doesn't exist?
Well, let me find out.
If you can just the calculator have that information on it.
Yeah. What else we got? Daniel Halliburton. In high school, I did way better in geography core. So did I.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So Drew De Pietro is, or what else we got here? We got Nick Ottaviano.
Yeah, we got to start talking about some people who actually think the genre exists. So,
Right,
like,
okay.
Nick's at least got some suggestions for bands, which is helpful, unlike everyone else making school jokes. Bunch of nerds.
So, do we need to add some bands? Or let's
think-
talk about the bands that are on here, first of all.
So,
Tell me about Converge.
So Converge, you know, a band from Massachusetts, they came up with a metalcore episode. You know, to my mind, there's, you know, this defining moment for, you know, this genre. If we're going to sort of decide that it's a genre, which is that sort of tail end of the 90s, early 2000s when you had bands like Converge, Dillinger, Botch, putting out their, either, not necessarily their first records, but their seminal records. So
Yeah.
there are other Converge records before Jane Doe, but does anyone care? No, no one cares. No one's like ever talks about the other Converge records. Jane Doe is a sort of defining thing where people were like, oh, this is not, it's metal, but it's like very difficult. And it's the weird times. This
Yeah.
is mathcore. We are
Yeah.
going to call this mathcore.
Right.
You know, they have evolved substantially, but I think that like Jane Doe, if we're gonna, you know, if we're gonna talk about mathcore, we're gonna say it's a genre that it's worth sort of maybe fitting into the tree. We're talking about that album as like one of the most important ones.
Now, for me, calculating infinity in my limited knowledge
Yeah.
of this end of the tree is, I remember hearing that record, 99,
Yeah.
I think it was, it came out, and I was like, holy, like, what just happened?
Yeah.
Like, what? First of all, what are these guys on?
Yeah.
And is it legal? Probably not. Secondly, how do they make this music? So yeah, tell me about that record.
So Calculating Infinity is interesting in my mind in terms of what people are on, because they're all hardcore kids, they're all straight edge. So it's like the only way that you could do any of this is to be like completely substance free. I don't know if that's true at all, but
Yeah.
like I just can't picture any of these people drinking. But Calculating Infinity literally has math in the name, right?
Indeed it does.
It does.
Indeed it does. We'll return to the board, shall we, Lisa?
We have some comments about Converge.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd classify Converge as mathcore. They truly span many subgenres, says Ashley on Twitter. What do you think?
I mean, I think that that's potentially fair. I don't want to sort of like poke holes in our own thing that we're trying to build here. But in particular, you know, as I mentioned, I think when you get into the later records, you're talking about, you know, like really wildly, like, you know, there's like 8-minute, you know, weird, dirgy ballads. You know, like that's not the same as 43% burnt.
Yeah. The
So I think-
satanic hippie, who quite possibly sounds like an employee here at Banger Films under disguise, says, fuck you, man.
Yeah.
I care about the Converge record before Jane Doe.
I will say this. You didn't name it, and you said the record. There are two. There are two records before Jane Doe. I don't know that I buy your shtick
Satanic
here, Satanic
hippie
Hippie.
has been busted.
I think
don't
Satanic
think what you're
Hippie-
saying is that the records before Jane Doe are insignificant. They're just maybe not part of this
No,
conversation.
I'm literally saying they're insignificant. I don't think that they matter. I think if they only put out those two records, their name would not be on a board right now.
Fair enough. Well,
And
I
if you're,
don't.
honestly, if you're saying that, you're just being contrary. It's like, I like the demo. Like, fuck you.
If
You like
that's the
Jane Doe.
case, I don't think we've heard the last from the Satanic
I know,
hippie.
yeah. Get at me, Satanic Hippie. I want to talk to you.
What else?
Typo Bro meant records. Okay, sorry, Satanic Hippie. Yeah, he's correcting me.
All right, fair enough. We've got some other mentions here. Fabio again is chiming in. Is Periphery mathcore? Animals as leaders, Between the Buried and Me? I don't know.
I think that's where we get into this prog thing. Like, I think of those bands as being proggy. Like, if I'm being honest, like, I've seen Between the Buried and Me. I haven't actually seen Animals as Leaders, but they probably stare at their hands when they play, right?
Indeed.
Yeah, so that's like, you know, I think of them, Gojira, like these sort of like handy bands. Like,
Right.
to me, that's not this. Like, that's not, you know, Botch. Like,
Yeah.
Botch is mathcore.
Yeah.
You know, We Are the Romans is a mathcore record.
I think there's some credence to this hardcore connection too, because those bands like Between the Buried and Me and Animals as Leaders don't have this noise element
Yeah.
that I find that a lot of the bands that could be considered mathcore have.
Well, it's just absolute chaos. Like I was joking, I made a sort of a YouTube playlist for myself to make sure I was like refamiliarized with a lot of music that I maybe haven't listened to as much in the last couple of years, and some bands that we had seen on Facebook where I was like, I actually haven't listened a lot to The Chariot because they're a Christian band and I don't believe in Christian music. So it was interesting to put that playlist together, and like when I shared it with you, I was like, here's sort of what I'm listening to. It was like, this is the most difficult selection of 20 songs because there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just absolute chaos.
Right, yeah.
And I think that is really where you see the influence of like a record like, My War, like later era kind of Black Flag on this.
So let me ask you, maybe this is going off script, and I'm sorry everyone, but the anthropologist in me wants to ask, what do people get out of this style? And maybe I'm asking everyone out there, and I'm asking you, because for me as a fan of metal, I rely on a certain amount, a healthy amount of repetition.
Yeah.
The repetition is part of the joy, and when the goosebumps come up, it's like, yes, like just stay on that fucking riff for a few more bars. What's your thought? Like, what do you get out of it?
So this is actually something that I was thinking a lot about because I was like, for me, this was actually a big gateway into listening to metal because I grew up listening to punk and hardcore.
Right. Okay.
And I think for me, and maybe for a lot of people that get into these bands, metal seems like it's dumb.
Yeah.
Like it's the heavy metal parking lot, like a lot of the stereotypes that like you guys have touched on in your films where you're just like...
Knuckle draggers.
Yeah,
we're
that's
knuckle
it. Like
draggers.
classical knuckle dragging vibes. And like the people that I knew that were into these bands were like silly, and I was like, I'm a serious man. I listen to Henry Rollins. And I think that those bands emerge from that, and you think you're smart for liking them.
Okay, Lisa?
We need to add some bands, and there's a lot of discussion about Meshuggah.
Okay. No. Next.
No. Okay, so yeah, we got...
Varamix, W-E-Y. What about Meshuggah? Balabeast. Meshuggah is extreme prog metal.
Yeah. Bernie on Twitter, Meshuggah is obvious. That's pretty interesting.
No, not mathcore. I don't need my calculator when I'm listening to Meshuggah.
All I need is that footage of Leonardo DiCaprio in Wolf of Wall Street, the Meshuggah face.
Meshuggah, you've always got the pulse, right?
Yeah, I've never
You've always got the pulse going.
Like it's weird. It's not necessarily 4/4, but it never breaks from that.
That's right. It's like
in my impression of Meshuggah.
It's a popcorn machine that somehow manages to find the one.
Yeah, I think of that as being definitely prog though, because like that in my mind is what you're describing, just like settling into a groove, like the way that you would associate with like classic prog rock.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe we should ask you, Mr. Sutherland.
Yes.
There are a lot of. We haven't added any
some
bands.
blanks.
I got a pen.
Okay.
And there's some blanks.
Well,
who do you think should be added?
I think I came prepared, not even with blanks. We have actual stickers for some of the bands. I mentioned Botch earlier, and I think of Botch in the same breath as Converge and Dillinger in terms of like, if we're calling this a genre, Botch is like one of the godfathers, right?
Okay.
Now they all play in Minus the Bear and other more boring bands, but American Nervosa, and then of course We Are the Romans, which came out I think in '99. We're talking like '99 is like an important year. It's like the same time as Calculating Infinity, and that record is like perfect.
Yannick Creations, Yarex La Plante. That just rolls off the tongue beautifully. For me, mathcore equals Protest the Hero. Am I wrong?
We've seen that a lot on Facebook as well.
Yeah.
I struggle with... To me, Protest the Hero sounds like Martyr, and to me, Martyr is prog metal. Like, do you know what I mean? Or like Atheist, or like one of those kinds of bands where I'm just like, like there's too much operatic singing. Like that's not a dig at Protest, who I think are frankly a sick band.
Or power metal, for that matter.
Yeah, but it's seriously like
actually it is a dig at power metal.
Yeah,
carry
on. What's your take on Protest being potentially a part of this?
No, I would. I don't think that they. And I think this is mathcore's tricky. I think it is a small family.
It is a small family.
On the tree.
But Matthias Nutfled, that's a tough last name, bro, and
go.
I'm sorry. Botch, We Came as Romans equals the Math album, and I agree with you. I think
there we go. We got Racer24T also saying Botch, and Horror Master says Botch as well.
We got a consensus on Botch.
Okay, Botch.
Good job.
I want to see if we have consensus on, I got two more that I want to try to throw up there.
What do you got here?
So let's go, I think that one's almost too obvious, so let's talk Daughters. So Daughters...
Don't call me...
Oh, God, let's make sure that no one ever sings Pearl Jam on this show ever again.
Not a fan of the name, but tell me about this band.
So Daughters, were in my mind, a mathcore band. Early on, they were sort of more grindy, and then later on, they got like real fucking weird. But they had an album called Canada Songs that came out, I believe, in 2003 on Robotic Empire. And, at the time, Robotic Empire was putting out tons of stuff that could be considered mathy, but also early Torch and great sort of post-hardcore stuff. But that Canada Songs LP, in my mind, is like up there with We Came as Rome, or We Are the Romans. It's that perfect sound. Like, they sound so much like Dillinger. They sound so much like Botch. I don't know if anybody else agrees with me. That band sort of came and went, and I was like pushing, and I was like, I'm gonna try to throw Daughters out there. JD now 147 likes Pearl Jam though, so backed. You're getting backed.
My bad. Racer24T is asking about Candiria. So is Alav. Talk Candiria.
Talk Candiria. I don't know. You talk Candiria.
I can't talk Candiria.
I can't talk Candiria. That's, I don't know. If
we have the question mark, we've got the question mark.
Yeah.
Maybe we need Candiria.
Is that Candiria?
Whoops.
I think Tyler Monroe agreed with me about Botch, because I saw a big uppercase, or not Botch, about Daughters. I saw a big...
All right.
Other people agreeing. So T-Bone saying Daughters is grindcore. Chad Dinglebug called me a shitheel, I think. That's rude. But yeah, the last Daughters album is like super crazy and like not mathcore. And I think that's honestly the issue that we're going to find with a lot of these bands, is they maybe put out, like, if they didn't break up, like Botch put out mathcore albums and then disintegrated. But like, these bands have evolved past it in a big way. A band that I don't think has evolved past it that I want to throw up there, Coalesce, right? Especially when they get into the weird banjo stuff on the last album, because that's super mathy. Again,
Sounds proggy to me. Banjo.
Yeah.
Wait a second.
Uh-oh. Oh, no. It's very proggy
No,
with the
tell me
banjo.
about Coalesce. Tell me about Coalesce.
So Coalesce, again, I think of them as being, in the same breath, if you look at like the Wikipedia page for mathcore, it's literally like Coalesce, Dillinger.
Right.
Functioning on Impatience in particular is such a classic record. That like disgusting opening, just like the, what more do you want from me? And like silence. And when you see them live, it's so upsetting, because you're just like, I'm really uncomfortable. And so it has that like highly uncomfortable in a live setting. I think there's a lot of drool. I think the drool factor on them is like pretty high.
Get out the buckets.
The guitar player is just all over, man. All over.
It's like a stable.
Yeah.
We had a bunch of Nick Viano, pardon me, has actually listed a whole bunch. I don't know if we'll have time to go through all of them, so let me just list them. From the band Broadening the Daylight, Norma Jean, Misery Signals, Poison the Well, The Number 12, Looks Like You, Shy, Hulud, Between the Buried and Me, and The Human Abstract. A lot of bands there.
Number 12 Looks Like You is definitely a mathcore band.
Okay, cool.
They were a band that like I actually didn't know that much about, but they came up so much in the chat, I started listening to them and I was like, yes, this is exactly the sound that we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, carry on.
Great band name, of course, Twilight Zone reference, which like always backed the Twilight Zone. I don't know why I never listened to them. It's entirely possible they were a Christian band. They sound exactly like all the bands that I liked when I was like in high, like I would have listened to that and be like, I'm smart. I listen to a band that's got like a 7/9 breakdown.
Right,
but you know, I don't know. Great. Tons of people agree with me about Coalesce.
Good. Tom Corcoran, Coalesce needs to be on there, and Matthias is chiming in again saying Coalesce in capitals.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm seeing Horror Master saying Coalesce, yes, also in the chat. Matthias Newton, can you tell us how to pronounce your last name? Because you're bringing a lot of value to the chat, and I feel brutal every time we're just like stumbling way through whatever. Okay, Daniel Halburton is saying I haven't thought about the number 12 in years. Daniel, are they a Christian band? Like, how did they fall kind of under the radar? Because there's another band that came up a lot on Facebook and stuff earlier, which was The Chariot. And again, similarly listening to that band, I was like, this definitely fits.
Right, yeah.
But they were on, I think, Solid State or whatever. This sort of like hard.
And I was listening to some Chariot. They definitely sound like a mathcore band.
They definitely sound like a mathcore band.
Right. We're going to add The Chariot.
I think it's worth talking about The Chariot.
Okay. We'll see what people have to say about that.
Yeah. And then Brian Cox and a few other people have mentioned this.
Yep.
Mastodon.
I wore the shirt because they didn't belong on the chart.
Yeah.
Mastodon is staying here. No.
Yeah, I don't see it. Like, I can see maybe someone at one point, like lazily in a blog, was like, it's mathcore, but like they're a prog metal band. Like
great band, one of my favorites, but I think they definitely belong in prog metal. They don't really have that sort of noisy element. Actually, some of their early records, at least two of the guys came out of the hardcore scene, so they do share that sort of sensibility, but definitely, especially as the band has evolved. I mean, I saw them opening for Judas Priest just a few weeks ago here in Toronto, and it just went like this over the Priest crowd, first of all.
Yeah.
But definitely, definitely not mathcore. But that would be interesting, a mathcore opening for Priest. That's an experiment.
I saw Santiago definitely agreed with you about not being mathcore. Although I will say the one thing that could make it mathcore is the fact that it would be really funny if you had to take off your shirt and put it up.
Oh, and we got Dee Dee the dog.
So now we got a dog. I wonder what the dog's take is on. So note to Sam, you need to put 12 magnet into mathcore. Okay, and the chariot. So there we go. Joshua Opatz, yes, chariot. What do you think? Who do you think is mathcore?
So what else we got here? Slayer is great. Mathcore. Sorry. Lincoln, okay, it's getting dirty out there. Linkin Park is apparently a mathcore band to some. I don't know what it is. Just every episode of Lockhorn, someone has to bring up Linkin Park.
But I think this is where the sort of problem with like mathcore really exists, which is that, we're defining a genre by saying that it's mathy, but like all music is mathy. Like, is Slayer not like, are you telling me that Rain and Blood isn't math? Because, it's all music. Like, it's 4/4. You're playing, it's math. Like, this is just like more math, and is that a thing? Like, does anyone out there know enough about math to say if something can be more or less math?
But part of the beauty of metal for a lot of people is the complexity. So we can't just start putting every complex metal band in mathcore. Otherwise, actually, Fabio is back asking about Periphery. Is kind of an interesting suggestion. Periphery is a great band, actually, and very, very complex, but I, again, wouldn't put them in mathcore because they share that sort of death metal sensibility as well. I don't see them as being mathcore. Fabio, you can tell me whether you agree or not. Lisa?
We don't have a lot of bands in our mathcore chart. There's a bunch there with question marks.
Yes.
And
I'm sorry. Yes, these should be moved over. My mistake. The Chariot.
Oh, yeah.
And number 12, Looks Like You, should be there. Candiria is the only question mark band.
And also, let's not forget Linkin Park. We need to make sure Linkin Park ends up there. I'm glad Matthew O'Dell agrees with me about like math rhythms doesn't necessarily mean something is mathcore. I think that's fair. That's like the Meshuggah thing.
What about Ion Dissonance, Alan Ketzer?
Yeah,
I think that's a pretty good point.
Yeah, but like to me, Ion Dissonance is like maybe where we reach sort of the whole issue with mathcore, which is that like they're a metalcore band.
Yeah.
I really, for me, it starts to see like I'm seeing the stuff that's being suggested here, and to me like a lot of the stuff is like, they're either metalcore bands or they're progressive hardcore or progressive metal, progressive hardcore. I guess that's just like the process of weeding out.
It's a lot of words. This is a complicated episode.
I mean,
I'm gonna just ring the bell.
Okay.
Lisa's ringing the bell.
Because I'm not.
Wait, are we going to talk about Gent though? Because we've seen a lot of talk about Periphery actually being a Gent band.
I think that's that's fair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's time.
It's time.
Okay.
It's time to move on. So.
To talk about Gent.
Okay. Let's do this.
Do we have to talk about Gent?
Or do we save that for the prog metal episode?
Let's take it. Let's dip a toe into Gent.
Yeah.
And then let's assume that Gent is going to be a big part of the prog metal discussion.
I agree.
Yeah. Cryptic Archives. Gent isn't metal. I don't think you can say. I can see how you could be like tired of people talking about it on the internet.
Yeah.
To me, Gent only exists as like an internet thing. Mm-hmm. Like it's one of those you have guys like Jared Dines, like Rob Scallon, doing like great, very funny videos about this thing, and there's obviously like a lot of interest in it from like a certain sort of genre, like kind of metal fan. But like, what's your? Do you think Gent exists?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think it might be sort of the emperor in new clothes. I think that it may just be another word for a certain kind of progressive metal.
Yeah.
I don't know if I buy that Gent is like a legitimate subgenre.
Yeah.
It's like next thing you know, we're gonna have like subgenres that have just emoticons like as the name.
Yeah, like the Oxford Dictionary.
They're just purely generated by social media chitter chatter. I think which brings us to a larger
that made
philosophical.
You sound really old, by the way.
I know, yeah. Mathcore, is this a genre that's too young to even deserve to be on the chart, which is the big question.
Well,
really.
I think, first of all, Cryptic Archives, Gent isn't really metal. There was something else that they said. Oscar Van, Gent sucks. Pizza Christ, Gent is the new metal of the new millennium is like maybe an interesting...
I did like the ladies and gents play on words there.
Yeah, I was going to say Ada BC Shank, that's the name of this like Irish band. I missed the name, but someone was like, yeah, it's just, it's an internet meme.
Too many strings for my brain to understand.
Yeah.
I mentioned that. Cryptic Archives, Gent really is metal. Yeah.
Meta, Gent is just prog metal, just with a different name. Tyler Monroe, joke.
Gent is like Viking metal. Nothing has ever made less sense to me than that sentence from Joshua Opatz.
Yeah.
In that it doesn't belong.
Isn't Jen younger? I think to me the mathcore thing is sort of similar to the conversation that you and Lisa, our bell ringer and wrangler, had about industrial sort of last week, which is that in the end, industrial sort of as you guys have it on the tree right now, kind of just captures something like pretty accurately. My thinking is that like really there are some bands here that put out records and bands that are coming up that definitely fit under this, but to me it's like a weird moment in time. Like we're gonna maybe like feel the same way about Gent at some point, where all of these bands on some level kind of fit into like at no point has a band come up where I'm like, that's strictly a mathcore band. Like I even think a band like Botch, who's all their records fit under this thing, you could kind of call them a metalcore band.
So is mathcore similar to industrial metal in that it's a moment in time, or is it something, do you think, that's going to continue?
I have a hard time believing that it will like fully continue in the way that it maybe like did have that moment at the end of the 90s. Like you had early 90s math rock. We didn't even really touch on this, but earlier when we were kind of brainstorming about this episode, we were talking about like Slint and Don Cab and these bands that, maybe came out of a punk rock sensibility, but, did this thing that was more sort of indie rock-ish, indie friendly, but like complicated. And these bands sort of like took what Don Cab was doing and then were like, I'm also going to add Black Flag.
T-Bone 5455, too young to start a chart, which I think is an interesting point, which is kind of what we're getting at.
Yeah.
Does it deserve to be on the chart?
Yeah, A-Lab is saying Converge is not a moment in time, and that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that, like, Converge as a mathcore band is a moment in time.
Someone's not letting go of Converge out there.
I know, I get it, man. Like, we were joking about this
for that.
when Converge opened for At the Gates and you guys all went. You were like, I'll never miss an At the Gates set. I was like, I'll never miss a Converge show. Look at me.
We finally agreed on something.
Yeah, exactly.
Lisa, you rang the bell. We ignored it. What's up?
As we start to wrap things up, I
Yep.
want to make sure that some of the bands people are asking about, do you
Yeah.
get consideration? One of them being Psyopus.
No comment.
I just don't know.
We need more brain power.
Apparently, we need someone who's like real. Yeah, I don't know.
We need a bigger calculator.
Horror Master says Linkin Park can go fuck themselves. There's a lot of it's the same.
I think that might be our cue to.
I think if we're reaching in bands that you and I are both like, I don't know. I think that is a tragic sign.
Okay, well, I think that slowly brings to a wrap.
I think it does.
The Mathcore episode. I think that definitely. I don't know. We're not gonna close the book on this, but I don't know if it really deserves to be there yet. I think it's up for debate.
Yeah. I don't think it does. I think it was interesting that it came up in that metalcore conversation. But what I do think we need to discuss in future episodes is like, one, you have Dillinger Escape Plan in your prog metal tree, which is nonsense.
Right.
Because like right now, like this is pretty small. I know we've zoomed in on it a few times, but like, what human being thinks that like Voivod and Dillinger Escape Plan and Tool and Rush all belong in the same tree? Like to me, this is so lazy, dude. You were just like, oh, here are some bands I like. Like before we started, you were like, this to me is an amazing selection of bands.
Gloves are off now. When we did this 11 years ago, prog metal wasn't what it is.
I guess that's it.
We didn't have Between the Buried and Me. We didn't have Animals as leaders. Opeth was still a death metal band and hadn't gone fully clean vocals. Don't get me started on this, Sutherland. We will tackle this in a few weeks on prog metal because I agree that progressive metal has become vastly more complex since we did that 10 years ago. But I would argue, where do you put the bands if they're not on prog metal?
Yeah, that's tough. Where does Opeth live?
Anyway, I think that's it for us on Lock Horns. Thank you, Sam Sutherland.
Thank you, Sam Dunn.
For your infinite knowledge on all things mathcore.
Except for Psyopus or
Thanks
whatever.
for everyone for tuning in, except those who mentioned Linkin Park. You're not invited back.
No.
We are back here next week. Thursday, December 3rd, and we are tackling folk metal with Natalie Zed. Folk metal, similar to mathcore, is a genre that a lot of people have felt deserve to be on the heavy metal family tree. And most importantly, a reminder to subscribe to Banger TV. Help us build this into a global digital metal channel. Thanks to Sam, Lisa, Daniel, Andrew, and Lana, all the team off camera. Reminder that this is going to be archived shortly. Today, you can watch it and debate amongst yourselves. Happy Thanksgiving, America. See you next time.
Go Packers tonight.